This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Hey gang, Jim Hill here. I just want to let you know that the episode of the Epic Universal podcast that you're about to listen to was actually recorded before the catastrophic wildfires that have ravaged so much of Southern California got underway. Of course, our hearts go out to all those folks whose lives have been directly impacted by this sadly still going on event. And Mr. Hersey and I hope that in the coming days that these wildfires will finally be brought under control and that the healing and rebuilding can then begin. But if you, like me, are feeling kind of helpless and overwhelmed at the moment, well, I want to remind you that you can always contribute to the American Red Cross, which is doing what it can on the ground out there to give immediate aid and comfort to the victims of these wildfires. Anyway, if you're looking for some sort of distraction at this obviously sad and stressful time, here's the podcast that Eric Hersey and I recorded last week, again ahead of when these devastating wildfires first broke out west. Welcome back to the Epic Universal Podcast. I'm entertainment writer Jim Hill, and this is the podcast where we cover the latest Universal news, rumors, history, and as always, I'm joined by Eric Hersey, and we're coming up on a 3-day weekend, right? Martin Luther King Day weekend, is that right?
I think we are, Jim. And, that prompts me the struggles that I had when scheduling my 2025 calendar, because I have 3 kids in 3 different schools that decide that they all have long weekends on different days of the year.
Oh, no.
And so figuring out when the heck I have to figure out, like, all right, which kid can I pull from school and not get yelled at? And did we do it in this way and so forth? So 2025 vacation planning was tough this year, but I think everybody's off for 3 days this weekend, I think.
Okay. All right. Well, here's hoping you find something fun to do as a family. Again, Nancy and I live up in the woods of New Hampshire, so I'm pretty sure at some point over the next 3 days I'll be shoveling.
Sure.
All right. Anyway, as always, folks, we have some interesting news to share when it comes to the Universal Company and the parks. And before we get to this week's feature, but we want to take a moment here to acknowledge our sponsor, and that is Be Our Guest Vacations. And are you planning your next getaway? Just like Eric now, trying to figure out how to, which kid can I pull out?
I need help there, Jim. That's what I need. I need someone to say, this is your optimal week to take the kids out of school.
Well, there we go. Then perhaps the nice folks at Be Our Guest Vacations could be the ones to handle the details here. As a platinum level earmarked travel agency, they specialize in providing concierge level services on trips to Universal Orlando, the Hollywood Park, likewise the Disney parks, cruises, and so much more. Their experienced team can take the stress out of planning. So all you have to do is enjoy an epic vacation, and you'll be able to do that in May, but we'll get to that later. Okay, visit beourguestvacations.com today to get started, and don't forget to tell them that the Epic Universal Podcast sent you. Okay, so let's talk news for this week. What did we dig up?
Well, Jim, I got something that came out a couple weeks ago, but I thought it was warranted to discuss. So Universal Studios Hollywood, they're actually casting the Back to the Future, Dungeons & Dragons, and basically all the characters from FanFest. They actually put out casting calls, which is kind of a sneak peek into who you can expect here, but also just in general, I had some questions or thoughts on some of this. So they're holding open auditions to portray the iconic characters. So of course it includes like the scripted and improv based performances, and the starting rate is $25 an hour. So I didn't know if that was readily available, but that's where we're at. So if you want to be one of these characters and so forth, this could be your, a summer gig for you. But it says the performers must be able to complete 6 to 7 45-minute sets per day. So I
Okay.
didn't know if that was a long set, but I always thought that the characters were always kind of shuffled in and out. But that sounds pretty standard, I guess. I don't know of these meet and greet stations.
Well, now you have to remember this is the after hours hard ticket thing they're talking about here.
Okay.
In fact, it's kind of interesting because Alice and I have been discussing going out for the nights that they do One Piece.
Right.
And I can't help but notice that here you're listing in the reference we pulled together for the show, for example, who they're looking, the roles they're auditioning for Universal Hollywood, at least for One Piece, and it's like Nami, Luffy, Sanji, and Zero, and wow, and interesting for Back to the Future, they're looking for a Marty McFly, a Doc Brown, and Biff Tannen.
Yeah, I
And
mean, we see Marty and Doc down in Florida. At least I've come across Doc. I think every time I'm down there, he's always wandering around
mhm.
down near the Simpsons land. But I
Yeah,
haven't seen a Biff, so that'll be very interesting to be able to
yeah,
get
yeah.
bullied maybe by Biff, and
Mhm.
maybe there's some waste that might be as a photo op. Maybe he'll be in the back of a porta john or whatever.
Wow. Well, there we go. There we go. I mean, it's an interesting time for the Back to the Future franchise. I don't know if you saw the Broadway musical
No.
just closed in New York after a good strong run, and will be going out on tour.
Okay.
And again, a lot of the I want to say Bob Gale, who worked with Robert Zemeckis on the movie, actually wrote Heard on the musical, and it did really well on the West End and had a good strong run in New York. And evidently now it's all about sending that out on the road. And but yeah, just fascinating to me because wasn't did the original Back to the Future, it was 1985, right?
Right. Yeah.
In fact, I have to admit, I'll be kind of intrigued to see what they do with the flux capacitor and all that at this event. But anyway,
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a franchise that literally has lived throughout the years
mhm,
and still holds its weight. Even, my kids are intrigued by it. I was interested, the Dungeons and Dragons, my brother is a huge,
mhm.
a role play guy, dungeon master, so forth. And I thought it was very interesting that Xanathar, the Beholder, I had to look him up, but it's like an eyeball type. It almost looks like an evil Mike Wazowski with
Yeah.
some. It looks like the child of Mike Wazowski and his girlfriend with the tentacle hair, like this. But I guess the face character needs to have puppetry, so that will be an interesting photo op. So I'm kind of excited for that. So if you guys go out there, I know you're there for One Piece, but please get a picture with
Yeah,
Xanathar,
yeah.
the Beholder.
And you're not wrong that could in fact be the child of Mike Wazowski and Cecilia. So,
There
all
you
right,
go.
there we go.
No, but I thought that was I thought that was pretty interesting that they're holding that. So we do also know some of the Star Trek guys, Human, Vulcan, Orion,
Mhm.
and more. So those are some, and then they haven't really announced anything for Harry Potter or the Nintendo or Jujutsu Kaisen, if I correctly said that. You know,
Again, so much of this sort of takes its inspiration from a similar event that Universal Studios Japan has done for a number of years here. So I'm going to be fascinated to see how this is run. But again, Alice and I are already talking about our plan is to buy tickets to the park earlier in the day, but also maybe get a hotel room there on site so we can, for example, she's never done Super Nintendo World yet. So we can do the stuff in the park, and then the night of the event, just solely concentrate on doing whatever the One Piece offerings are. But
that's
just
awesome.
going to be interesting to see what happens. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know what? This just seeing this in select meet and greets
mhm.
reminded me of something that Stingray Travel out on Twitter. We've been messaging back and forth,
Yes.
and I know you've been part of this conversation, but it intrigued me tremendously that there was a like newspaper article that talked about the cartoon like superstars meet and greets that was like in the weekends back, I'm guessing the 80s, 90s. And there's a slew of characters showcased on this newspaper article. I mean,
Mhm.
it's your prominent like Hello Kitty and Flintstones and Popeye and Woody
Mhm.
Woodpecker, but there are pictures of He-Man and
Yeah.
She-Ra.
Yep.
And I had so many questions based off this that I don't expect you to answer them all now, but I do
Mhm.
think this is something that I'm gonna have to queue up for a future show, and we're gonna have to deep dive into this and see
Oh,
what
no,
this was
no.
all about.
No, absolutely. Just the print ad alone for this, which again, by the way, set up for weekends in October.
Yep.
And what's kind of intriguing is that, remember, Halloween Horror Night. This is when Halloween Horror Night would be going on after hours. All right, but they're looking to persuade folks to come out to the park during the day. So I want to say, and of course, I don't know as the park would have actually ever done this, but for the photo op for this, there have to be 35, maybe 40 characters.
So many.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking here even closer, and it has Barbie and the Rockettes.
Mhm.
It has Care Bears. It has Thundercats. I mean, there are so many, and then the
Yeah.
Hanna Barbera guys.
No, absolutely. But at the same time, it sort of looks like you've got Dennis the Menace, you've got Cabbage Patch Kids. It seems that they threw a very, very wide net. In fact, and Stingray Travel has been kind enough to share that there was a commercial that supported this, and at one point you see the walk around character versions of Archie and Betty and Veronica from the Archie strip going through this, and it's just sort of like, who, you know, who decided? Oh, well, the kids will love that Archie. Oh, we got to
Yeah,
get those in there.
it's a just get a normal guy. Just
Yeah,
oh, that's so
but
funny.
but at the same time, what I love about the print ad is if you look all the way to the back, this poor Woody Woodpecker is like, I'm here too.
Right.
I was the first. So
No, I think Jim, we might need to deep dive into this and see
no,
some of this.
absolutely.
I would
Mhm,
love if there's a reason to reach out to me. I would love to see pictures
mhm.
of people that met some of these. Any photo ops,
Oh
just send them
yeah,
over to me.
yeah,
I'd love to see this stuff.
and more to the point, we'd love a good, sharp set of eyes to help determine everybody we're looking at here. Because again, lots of Hanna Barbera. I'm seeing Yogi Bear and Huckleberry Hound, but I swear to God, I'm looking at Garfield, and it's like that's
Yep.
a question in and of itself. Like
So
who?
much.
Yeah. So all
Yeah.
right.
So, all right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jim, since we're talking, I did see Popeye on there. Did you know Popeye is in the public domain now?
Yeah, and in fact, I want to say in the tradition of the past 2 and 3 years, when first Winnie the Pooh slid into the
Oh,
public domain.
geez. I know where
Yeah,
you're going with this. Is this
yeah,
a thing?
yeah. That there's the Popeye slasher movie coming.
Oh
Uh,
God. Who's
yeah.
making these and are they must be making money off of them.
No. Absolutely, absolutely. The notion is you don't have to pay the rights for the character, and if you film this thing at just the right price point and just enough gore, that there's profit to be had.
Oh God. Yeah, yeah, there. Well, I just wanted to so my question was this, Jim, and
Hmm.
I'm assuming that just because it's in the public domain, it's not like he can just show up at any old theme park anywhere now, right?
Oh
Like he can't just show up at Kennywood.
no. And again, because there has been additional product made with Popeye over the years. I mean, it's select versions of the character
Okay, yeah.
give entered the public domain. But yeah, I think, as you pointed out in your research, if we look at, for example, the shorts that Paramount made with Fleischer, for example, in the 30s and the 40s. Well, the Fleischer shorts were 30s, and then the famous studios Popeyes were the 40s. Those remain in copyright,
So
and
this is just his what? Probably the cartoon strip, right?
yeah, and again, then it gets interesting because it's like, okay, and I want to say Thimble Theater existed before Popeye entered the equation, so it'll be interesting to see if Olive Oil enters any of this stuff because of her. She as a character actually predated Popeye.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I looked at that earlier. I think she was like 1919 or something. So she's
There
already
we
been
go.
around. So
Yeah,
she already has her slasher film.
there
It
we
might come
go.
out of the woodworks.
Oh well, but lovely, lovely. Can't wait. So
Oh,
okay.
so Jim, it seems like we're just talking about characters. So I know you talked about it on the Disney dish, but from a Universal perspective. So Disney was sent out, we're sending out surveys
Mhm.
gauging interest in the Simpsons lands, right? So it was
Yeah.
essentially, which of the following offerings do you want to hear more about the Simpsons? Now, this is from Disney, and on there was character meet and greets and new lands. So is it possible that we could have two Simpsons lands or a meet and greet Simpsons character at Universal and a meet and greet Simpsons at Disney? Like, what is the odds here? And isn't like something ending soon with the
Yeah.
Simpsons?
Actually, the deal that Universal cut with Gracie, the production company for the Simpsons television series, it's a 20-year deal, and the Simpsons attraction, the Simpsons ride, first opened at Universal in 2008. So, if you
Okay.
work at the math here, folks,
Yeah.
that means 2028 that the rights revert to Gracie's, and of course, these days, the Simpsons are owned outright by Disney. And in fact, we'll have to bring Drew on at some point because he was telling me a wonderful story once where it's the early days of Disney sussing out whether or not they actually want to buy 20th Century Fox, or excuse me, certain film and
Right.
television assets of 20th Century Fox. And there was a concern within the company. It's like, geez, I don't know if the Simpsons and Disney are a really good fit. And so Disney goes out and focus groups and does the research, and they come back and it's like, oh my God. It's like the Simpsons and Disney were made to be together. It's just the Simpsons have so many of the strengths that Disney has. They have a huge cast, a very vivid world. They have a huge backlog of shows, and more to the point, they have a fan base that is now multi-generational.
Sure.
The
Yeah.
parents love the Simpsons, the kids love the Simpsons, and so Disney is quite anxious to get into the Simpsons theme park business. I will say this much: I will be sad to see it go from the Universal parks. In fact, I want, especially out ahead of when the rights go away, I want to get together with you out in Hollywood, because the Simpsons land out in Hollywood, the one in Florida is good. But the one in Hollywood, they actually deliberately built it so it's the berm that hides the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. So it's
Ah,
actually tall.
okay.
The facades are hyper detailed, and there are some buildings out there in California that just didn't get built in Florida. And in fact, it's especially worth it if you're a Simpson fan to go upstairs at Krusty Burger, because there's the equivalent of a function room up there. But what they did when they decided they were going to decorate the room is they literally turned to the artists who were working on the Simpson show at that time and said, "Go nuts. Go upstairs and draw your favorite character on the walls. Do character specific art, gags that only fans of the show will get." And so this space upstairs is so wonderful if you're a Simpsons fan. And now just the notion of, and it's going away.
Ah, yeah, I just have a hard time figuring out where, like, I don't think there'll be a land at the Disney parks. I can't imagine, like, I'm granted, Disney has the information for
Mhm.
from Disney Plus, probably to gauge the real interest of how many people are watching
Oh,
and
yeah.
really decide if that is
Mhm,
a thing that people want. Plus, they're sending out these surveys. Mix
mhm.
all that together, I guess. But where the heck would they put the land? And the other thing that we didn't talk about a couple weeks ago, I mean, is it a possibility that the Wicked theme park area could be where the Simpsons are? Or is that just like too far fetched? But I mean, like if you're getting rid of a land, there's a chunk of real estate there. You could really make a good land.
Now, well, what's interesting is I have been hearing, because you have to look at Fast Food Boulevard and where the Simpsons ride is, and along with
Yeah.
Kang and Kotis's Swirl and Hurl. What I've heard repeatedly is that's the Pokemon area.
Oh, that makes sense. That's
Yeah.
that's a no-brainer. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That-
you I'll take that. Absolutely.
You have a quick service restaurant, you have retail, you have a giant ride and a supporting ride. It's just sort of like,
And it kind of goes towards DreamWorks. So I mean, that whole side of the park could be very more kid-friendly.
no,
right?
there you go. And in fact, I remember talking with somebody at Universal Creative, and this has been in the works for a long time. I mean, for example, when I was talking with this gentleman, it was about when Pokemon Go was going on.
Oh, yeah.
And people were walking around with their phones and collecting the characters. And Universal was all about, wouldn't it be cool if, yeah, there's Pokemon that you can only get if you wander around Universal Studios Florida. How many families would actually book vacations because the 6 special Pokemon characters that are only inside there, or if you're riding the ride?
Right. We would have been at Universal 5 years ago when my oldest son was into it. So yeah, I think Pokemon is, I mean, knowing by the amount of Pokemon cards we got at the Hersey house for Christmas, I think that is a sure bet if they can make that work. I'd love to see that happen, and hate to say it, but I like, goodbye Simpsons. I'll take Pokemon.
But again, there's just a part of me that, but you lose the Frying Dutchman.
I know.
Kind of.
Well, maybe. Hey, we'll keep our eyes on this one. So this is an
Okay.
interesting story, nonetheless. Of where the heck are the Simpsons going to be? What park and so
There we
forth.
go.
So
There we go.
that's what we
So-
got so far this week, Jim. I
Yeah,
appreciate
okay.
your insights on all that.
No. Okay, so that's going to do it for the news portion of this week's show. And coming up next, we're going to use the Wolfman movie, which, by the way, opens in theaters today, January 17th. I want to say this is the Blumhouse version. But we're going to use this as an opportunity to look back at some earlier Wolfman stuff that Universal did, and how it led to the Monster Rally movies. But first, this.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
And we're back. Okay, so Eric, I have to ask, have you seen any of the Blumhouse Universal horror things? I mean, they did their Invisible Man thing.
I saw most of the trailers, so
Okay.
I just to be open with you. This is not my preferred genre. Even after watching the Wolfman trailer today, I'm like, yeah, probably not the movie that I'm going to see. But I do know way too many people that this is their preferred genre. This is what they like.
Oh, no,
I,
no.
on the other hand, am more into the old black and white ones. I
Well,
I like nostalgia.
Well, and again, it's interesting you say that, because the very first Wolfman movie that Universal did, it arrived in theaters December 9th, 1941. So 2 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And I too have a fondness for, if anything, for the old fashioned makeup effect where
Yeah.
and God, Lon Chaney Jr. later in life would tell these stories about, well, the gimmick of what Jack Pierce, the head of makeup at Universal at the time, is they'd start by, Lon Chaney would fall back in a chair and you'd get a close up of his face. And then what they then did is, he said they actually nailed his head into the chair.
Oh no.
So he couldn't move. And then they'd come in and put a couple little hairs. I mean, and when I say nail, they would take
Sure.
like individual pieces of his scalp or that sort of thing, and these tiny little nails. And it's like, okay. And they put individual hairs on his face and then shoot it a couple of seconds and then put some more hair on his face. And the transformation into a werewolf that you see in the film that takes maybe 20, 30, 40 seconds, that's 7 hours in front of a camera. And as Lon Chaney said, and they wouldn't let me get up to go to the bathroom. So,
Oh God, no, that sounds horrific. But you know, that's Hollywood.
That's Hollywood. Okay, so, but today, the movie I'd like to talk about, and by the way, Universal, if you're counting, has done 7 Wolfman movies. But the one we're going to talk about today was the one they put out in March of 1943, and it was Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And what's significant about this is, well, it's the very first of what Universal like to call its monster rally movies. And I guess the easiest way to explain this is it was the Avengers.
I was gonna say, is it Endgame? Yeah, it's the Avengers, right? Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. All right. Now, mind you, what was different about the Monster Rally movies is prior to 43, the Universal's classic monsters stayed in their lanes. I mean, look, there were sequels. We had for example, the original Frankenstein that goes out into theaters in 33. We got The Bride of Frankenstein that goes out April of 35. And then we get The Son of Frankenstein, which is released to theaters 4 years later, January of 39. But now that third Frankenstein movie, though, Eric, that's interesting because 2 years previous, and we're now talking May of 1936, Universal formally announced, we're out of the monster business. They had just put a sequel out in the theaters, Dracula's Daughter. Hadn't done all that well. And the studio's new management team, by the way, they had just forced out the company founder, Carl Laemmle, in a hostile takeover. And they turned to the Hollywood community and said, this is the new Universal. We don't do monster movies anymore.
And then they hired Trey and Matt to make a video with Seagrams, right?
There
Call
we
back
go.
to last week. No.
There we go.
No, different crew, right?
Different crew. Okay. And this business plan, it lasts till the summer of 38, which is when the Regina Theater, and by the way, that's a revival house that was on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, back in the 30s and the 40s. It begins running a horror-themed triple bill. And the 3 films on this bill are Universal's original version of Dracula, that came out in February of 31. James Whale's Frankenstein, which Universal sent out to theaters in December 31, just 10 months after Dracula. That fascinates me. And then kind of a weird third film to throw in the pile here, Son of Kong, the RKO sequel to the original King Kong, which, by the way, that came out in theaters December of 33, just 9 months after the original King Kong.
They moved quickly.
Well, and when you think about it, both Son of Kong and King Kong have all of that stop motion animation, right. And it's just like, how were you able to get this done? In
nailing people's heads to the ground. That's what it is. No.
There we go.
They nailed their feet. They said, "You work until this is done."
There you go. And by the way, I bring this up because just in the past week or so, James Gunn was out talking about how DC Comics and Warner Brothers Discovery has a sequel to The Batman in development. And that originally went out into theaters May of 2022. And the sequel has just gotten pushed back to 2027. And James Gunn was like, look, now, this is typical for a superhero movie. There's sometimes a 5-year lag. And again, you look at Universal, these things going out the door as quickly as they were. In fact, by the way, the folks at Universal look at the lines outside of the Regina Theater that go up and down Wilshire Boulevard, and it's like, okay, All right. I think we're back in the Frankenstein business. So August of 38, they announced third Frankenstein movie in the works. By the way, this one initially, Eric, was called After Frankenstein. But brand new production, being fast tracked with the studio. They're bringing back Boris Karloff, who played the monster in the original Frankenstein and its sequel, and also Bela Lugosi, the star of Dracula. And when I say fast track, I'm not kidding. They production starts November 9th of that year, 1938. They shoot the entire movie in 27 days. And it's actually out in theaters by January 13th, 1939.
Oh my, that I want to see this.
Yeah, well, no, that's it exactly.
Does it even look good? I mean, is it finished?
That's the interesting thing. Universal was such a smoothly run organization. Remember, in a weird sort of way, this is before there's television. Just, okay, this needs to be done, and the guys want it in theaters by January. You get it done. And it does well enough at the box office that Universal immediately decides, okay, well, why don't we let's do some sequels to other classic horror movies. So, The Invisible Man, Universal released a version of that in November 33, and then there was The Mummy, another Boris Karloff vehicle that was actually released in theaters in December of 32. Universal stomps on the gas, so the Invisible Man Returns arrives in theaters January of 1940, and then The Mummy's Hand shows up just 9 months after that, September 20th, 1940. And so these three sequels to Universal classic monster movies do solid enough business that the folks in charge of the studio are like, well, all right, what if we add a new monster to the mix? And now we're talking about Lon Chaney Jr. being nailed into that chair and Jack Pierce doing his amazing makeup. And but what's fascinating is they begin preview screening it in November of 41, some 5 weeks before the film actually opens in theaters. And it does so well that the executive in charge of the studio was like, well, let's do another Frankenstein. So we get a fourth Frankenstein movie, The Ghost of Frankenstein, which, again, just it amazes me. It gets announced in the trades November 13th of 41. And it's in front of the cameras 1 month later, December 41. They get the entire thing shot by early January, and then it's 8 weeks later. It's out in theaters around the country. Ghost of Frankenstein, March of 42.
Jim, it seems like they just said, you know what, we're just going to keep you guys in the makeup. You know, it takes us longer to put just stay in the makeup because we're going to be making a movie here in a couple weeks. Just live as Frankenstein. The amount of movies that they're coming out with is insane.
Oh, and just a quick side note here. Bela Lugosi winds up playing the Frankenstein monster in fact, the movie we'll be discussing shortly, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. And he was talking about, he was used to playing Dracula.
Yeah.
And it just sort of like, all right, put on the cape. I comb my hair back. I'm good. And he was talking about being on the set where between the boots and the actual face makeup, it was 35 pounds of stuff. And he was like, if you told me this, I would have never done this movie.
Just wearing a fat suit, yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Can I go back to playing Dracula? All right, anyway, like I said, Ghost of Frankenstein out in theaters March of 42. But here's where Universal notices something interesting. Now remember, they had been making all these Universal classic monster movies with the assumption that our audience for these movies is adults. It's horror. And so we're making these movies with adult scares for adult audiences. But in the early days of World War II, with many of America's men now overseas fighting in that conflict, the exhibitors noticed something interesting, that even with a large chunk of the movie going public, now, for lack of a better term, out of the picture,
right.
Business actually hadn't fallen off. for the Universal Classic Monsters movie. If anything, ticket sales had actually gotten a little stronger in the early 1940s. So the studio, with the help of the exhibitors, does a little investigating. But they actually start paying closer attention to who it is who's actually buying the tickets to these Universal Pictures release. And it turns out kids 10 and above, as well as young teens, they're the ones who are now the segment that's turning out strongest for these Universal Classic Monster movies. And also, Eric, it's worth noting, we are talking 42, 43. These are the war years, where thanks to the war effort and things like rationing, supplies for making movies have gotten kind of scarce. And so here's a Universal that's actually looking for ways to keep the costs down on its classic monster movies. So what's interesting is if you watch the movies from this era, it's like, oh, that's the same piece of lab equipment, or that's the same table they tied Frankenstein down in the last movie. They're reusing props, they're using sets, costumes. And it's during this time that an unnamed Universal executive has an absolute genius idea. So it's like, well, look, we're trying to save money, right? We're keeping costs down. So what if we had two of our Universal Classic Monsters appear in the same movie together? So Universal hires this guy, Roy Williams Neal. And by the way, he was the guy who would eventually do all of the Basil Rathbone, Nigel Bruce, Sherlock Holmes movies for Universal. So, and they made a buttle out of those in the 40s as well. But anyway, he's the one who gets tapped to work on this project. And they pulled him into a meeting and said, look, all right, this is the first one of these that we're actually making with the little kid audience in mind. So it has to be scary, but not too scary. So Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman goes before the cameras in October of 1942. And so because this time around, because Universal is trying to hit a sweet spot, a classic monster movie that will appeal to adults, but at the same time is largely aimed at the kiddie audience, they put some extra time, they put some extra money in, they hold...
Well, they give it an extra week, Jim.
Well, there we go. But what the interesting thing is they actually hold test screenings around the country just to see if we're getting the mix of elements right. And for example, on the heels of those test screenings, late in production, they add this big fight sequence in the third act where these two classic Universal monsters are battling in a mad scientist laboratory and then causing a lot of the equipment there to break or explode. And evidently they take it out again, they test it, and the reaction is over the moon, especially with the little kids. So they actually reconfigure the ad campaign of the film. So the first thing you see on the poster is Frankenstein's monster and the Wolfman fighting in the lab. It's like, oh, they fight. Okay, I got to go see this movie.
I'm not gonna lie, Jim. I looked for trailers like when I was watching to see this stuff, and I wanted to see the fight. I've watched a whole bunch of boring scenes where I'm like, well, they're not even fighting; they're working together. I wanted to see the fight, so I'm with those kids.
Well, and the funniest thing is Roy Williams Neal. If you look at the fight scene, first of all, that's not Bela Lugosi and that's not Lon Chaney Jr. It's two stuntmen in the makeup, in the Frankenstein monster makeup and the Wolfman makeup, and Roy William Neal at this point is just so ticked off that Universal gave him this job. It's like he just sat them and said, okay, here's the deal. I want you to start the fight over there, and I want you to go over there, and my camera's going to be positioned here, and you just do what you want. And that's the thing. You had two stuntmen like, well, okay, the first time ever, you do what you want. And it turned out to be this really dynamic fight, which of course the publicity department said, oh, we want that. So anyway, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, again, out in theaters, March of 43, does so well. They immediately order a second Monster Rally movie. And this one, The House of Frankenstein, didn't have two Universal Classic monsters in it. It had three. Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and Dracula, plus a mad scientist and a hunchback. And again, God love the the publicity department at Universal, because they put together a poster for House of Frankenstein that clearly stresses that the Universal classic monsters are all together in one movie.
Hopefully with a fight scene.
Yes. Okay. So this opens in theaters December 44, goes wide in theaters nationwide February of the following year, 1945. And again, shot back in April of 44, had the highest budget ever for a Universal Classic Monsters movie, $354,000. That's the equivalent of $6.3 million today. But again, they got it completely shot and in the can in 5 weeks. And again, does so well at the box office that Universal decides, let's do a third Monster Rally movie. Now, mind you, this one originally went into production as Wolfman versus Dracula. But House of Frankenstein had done so well with the kiddie audience that Universal's marketing department thought we need to have a stronger tie to the earlier movie. So Wolfman versus Dracula gets its name changed to House of Dracula. But this is where reality intrudes, folks. I mean, it's kind of strange for Universal to be making a horror movie. This goes before the camera. September 17th, 1945, which is just 2 weeks after the representatives of the Japanese government had signed the terms of surrender on the USS Missouri. So World War II is over. But at the same time, people back in the States are only just seeing the newsreel footage and the newspaper coverage of the blast sites at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And it's just sort of like, and this is real life horror, seeing what the atomic bomb had wrought, versus here they are on the Universal backlot. It's like, well, time to go back to the castle and blow up the laboratory. And also, Eric, there's the fact that Universal hadn't exactly prospered during the war. In fact, things had gotten so dire toward the end of World War II that the studio began looking for new financial partners to keep the place afloat. And they eventually found this in British entrepreneur J. Arthur Rank, who winds up buying 1/4 of the available Universal stock. But that said, Rank was like, I'm coming on board. Again, I want you to reorganize the studio. And so studio ends up with a new name. It goes from Universal Pictures to Universal International Pictures. And Rank insists on some pretty serious cuts. So November 28th, 1945, about a month after House of Dracula had been shot, there were hundreds of layoffs at Universal. And we're talking about some of these technicians, Eric, they had worked at Universal City for decades at that point. I mean, you got to remember that the studio was founded back in March of 1915 with one of the very first hits at the place was a Universal monster movie, Phantom of the Opera. And the staff cuts even extend to the stars who work at the studio. When all was said and done, only 4 contract players were left on the payroll. There was singer Deanna Durbin. There was Dominican actress Maria Montez, and then there was the comedy team of Abbott and Costello. And again, history repeats itself that when it comes to the Monster Rally movies, after House of Dracula was released at theaters in December 45, Universal, we're out of the monster movie business again.
Right.
And what was interesting is that Abbott and Costello's next couple of films for Universal, the ones that were sent out in the theaters in 46, 47, didn't do well at the box office either. Especially compared to the way Bud and Lou's movies did during the war years. And in 47, the studio seriously considered not renewing Abbott and Costello's contract. But again, just how everything old is new again. Someone in management remembered the Monster Rally movies and had what he thought was a brainstorm.
Hold on, you're not telling me, Jim.
Yep.
This
Okay.
is it. This is it. It's just sort of like, maybe what Bud and Lou need to rejuvenate their careers is a team up with the Universal Classic
Oh
Monsters.
God.
Now, I want to stress here that Lou Costello thought this was a terrible idea. When he was handed the script for the film, which, by the way, originally went with the title "The Brain of Frankenstein," Costello supposedly told Universal executives, like, "Look, my 5-year-old daughter could write a better script than this," and so he only agrees to make the movie, to show up on set for what now is renamed Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Studio executives had to agree to front him $50,000 in cash. This was part of the salary he'd agreed to do the movie, but he wanted it up front.
Right.
And even then, there were days where Lou would just not come in to work. Or there were days where, they're sitting there with film in the camera, with the monsters with makeup on their faces, and Bud and Lou won't come out of their trailer. They're playing poker. And it's just sort of like, no, not today. But same playbook in place. Movie shot quickly and on the cheap. They start February 5th, 1948. Entire thing's in the can, even with those days when Bud and Lou didn't show up or wouldn't come out of their trailer. Film's in the can totally by March 20th of that same year. 3 months later, it's in theaters. It turns out to be the most successful Universal classic monster movie since the original Frankenstein was released to theaters in November 31. It's also Bud and Lou's most popular film since the war years.
Oh God.
And Universal is so thrilled, they signed them to a 7-year contract extension at that point. And they make a bunch of Abbott and Costello Meet Monsters movies. They did Abbott and Costello Meet Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In fact, the very last movie they made for Universal, Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. It was the very last thing before their 7-year contract extension was up. That went out into theaters in April of 55. And all of this came on the heels because some Universal executive back in 1942 was like, well, what if we put the Frankenstein monster and the Wolfman together in a movie? What would happen if we did that? So
Abbott and Costello will make a lot of money in several years. That's what it's going to be.
There we go.
That is interesting and fascinating. And I don't, Jim, have you seen the Abbott and Costello Meet the Monsters? Is any of these? I mean, are they any good?
Actually, I'm going to say this. Abbott and Costello and Meet Frankenstein is actually probably one of the best things that Bud and Lou have ever done, because what's interesting is the Universal monsters, and again, it's Bela Lugosi as Dracula, it's Lon Chaney back as the Lawrence Talbot, the Wolfman, even Glenn Strange, the gentleman who at this point was playing Frankenstein's monster. They're in it and they play it straight.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a famous story about the Muppet Christmas Carol.
Oh, yeah.
And Michael Caine, when he gets hired to play Scrooge in that thing, turns to Brian Henson, Jim's son. He's the one who directed the movie, and said, okay, let me tell you what we're going to do here. I'm going to play Scrooge like it's the Royal Shakespeare Company. I'm going to play this straighter than straight. And the Muppets can do whatever they want, but I'm treating this like it's a legitimate drama. And the thing is, because he's so strong and so straight, the Muppets are so much more fun because they're crazy.
Right.
And that's literally the same thing with Abbott and Costello Meets Frankenstein.
All right. Well,
because
you sold me on it. I'd watch it. I'd give it a go, because you're saying, hey, it's like Muppet Christmas Carol. I love that. I could give it a go.
There we go. No, it's a wonderful film, but at the same time, it's also it's a creature of this era of Universal.
history. So if you bother to put in the time to watch, for example, House of Frankenstein and House of Dracula, and then watch Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, it's like, yep, there's that table again. Yep, there's that equipment again.
There you go.
And hell, that's the same cape that Dracula wore. They did them on the cheap, and they did what they had to deliver the goods. So.
Well, it sounds like they made theirs. It's so funny that you brought this to the table, because I had insomnia last night, and I was up until 2 a.m. and I was watching Light and Magic, the documentary on Disney Plus that's about Industrial Light and Magic. And there is a strong segment in there that they talk about the famous Monsters magazines. And they some of the guys that worked at Industrial Light and Magic were like really turned onto the gags and stuff because of this. Yeah. And they took us into a guy named Forrest J. Ackerman's house.
Yes.
And his house was fantastic, because I mean, they only showed it for a couple seconds in the show, but you walk through and you see all of these props, and he must have just really been into it. So while you're talking here, I see all this in my head, what these props and these masks and everything. And there's something about these Universal monsters that is quite fascinating.
Okay. One final note here, because again, you just brought up Industrial Light and Magic. If you want to see something fascinating, again, remember, ILM wanted to get into making feature animation, and they had done all of that CG work for Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, but they wanted to do a standalone feature. And if you want to see something absolutely fascinating, Google ILM Frankenstein.
Oh,
because they wanted to make a Frankenstein movie, but the idea was, we're going to do it in CG, but we're going to do it like it's Universal in 1931. And so they have a couple of the tests that they did.
It. Yeah. Oh, yes. This is the beauty, guys. You only get this here. Yeah. Jim digging in the archives, giving us juice to find on YouTube.
And if you hammer on, there's concept art out there and some script pages, and it's a fascinating what might have been. They couldn't bring themselves to turn the key to go full on into production. And it kind of breaks your heart, because you look at the style and the animation, what they were looking to do, and it would have been killer. It would have been absolute killer.
Well, that's Jim. These are the nuggets that I come to the show for. So thank you for that.
No. Glad to do it. And but more to the point, just remember, there's a brand new Wolfman movie out in theaters right now from Universal, and oh, by the way, supposedly, what is it? Elizabeth Moss, who starred in The Invisible Man back in 2020, as recently as last year. There's supposedly a sequel in development for that. So, gotta be
perfect for that classic monsters, or the monsters at Epic Universe. So I think get it going.
There we go. Okay, so I think that's gonna bring us to the end of this week's Epic Universal podcast. But as always, folks, Eric and I love to hear from you. And if you have suggestions, like our good friend Stingray Travel.
Absolutely.
Got to do some research on that whole cartoon weekend thing. But if people want to reach out with suggestions for future shows and that sort of thing, Eric, how can they get a hold of you?
I'm nearly on every single platform you can find at Eric Hersey. Jim, how about you?
Well, let's see. I am on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, and Instagram is Jim Hill Media, and over on Facebook as Jim Hill Media News. And I guess that's going to do it for this week's show. So, on behalf of Ms. Hersey, thank you for listening, folks. And please stick around to hear what's coming up later this month on the Jim Hill Media Podcast Network. Thanks for listening to today's episode. And if you like what you heard, head on over to Apple Podcasts and give us a review. This really helps get the word out about our shows. We also have some other shows on the network that you might like. Each week, we drop a brand new Disney dish with Lon Testa, or animation and movie news. please listen to Fine Tuning with Drew Taylor. By the way, you can also check out Drew's other podcasts, like The Fuse, the official Mission Impossible podcast, which he does with Charles Hood. For all things Lucasfilm, why don't you subscribe to Looking at Lucasfilm with Brian Gahn? Likewise, we have I Want That Too with the lovely Lon Hersey, our weekly podcast that features the latest merch and the stories behind that merch. And our Epic Universal podcast takes a look at the Universal theme park. So please join Eric Hersey and I on that weekly. If you enjoy theme park history, we also host Manufacturing the Magic with Shelley and Noah Valladolid. That podcast tells the story of how we got the modern theme parks that we enjoy today. Join myself, Len Testa, and veteran Imagineer Jim Schul for our latest season of Disney Unpacked, our first ever video series exclusively for Patreon. These get released first Sunday of every month, and each month we release several exclusive podcasts to help support this video series. I want to thank everyone that supports the Jim Hill Media Network. For more information about podcasts and content, head on over to jimhillmedia.com. So that's going to do it for now, folks. Thanks again for listening, and we will catch up on the next show.